last thing in her bag was a folded gas station map of West Virginia. Wren Calloway had circled one town in blue ink 4 days ago. The circle sat over Marlinton, a small Appalachian community in Pocahontas County with fewer than 1,100 people and more trees than mailboxes. She had drawn an arrow from the circle to the margin and written the words, "Carriage House, $10." That map was creased and soft from handling, worn thin at the folds from being opened and refolded dozens of times. It lived between a rolled pair of wool socks and a tin of sardines she had been saving for 2 days. Everything Wren owned fit inside the canvas messenger bag that hung from her shoulder. She was 19 years old, standing at the edge of a gravel pull-off along Route 219 on a Tuesday morning in April. The fog was pulling apart over the Greenbrier River in slow white ribbons. The tortoiseshell cat sitting at her boots looked up at her and yawned. Welcome to Paw and Trail Stories. If you love animals, small towns, and second chances in forgotten places, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You will not want to miss what Wren found under those old floors. The cat's name was Clover. She was a long-haired tortoiseshell with a coat that swirled black, amber, and deep chocolate together in uneven patches across her body. Her eyes were copper gold, bright and watchful, the kind that caught light even in shadow. She had a feathery plume of a tail she carried high like a flag. There was a small notch in her left ear from some old scrape nobody knew the story of. Clover weighed about 9 pounds soaking wet. She had showed up behind a dumpster at a truck stop outside Lewisburg 7 months earlier, skinny and hissing at anything that moved. Wren had been sitting on the curb eating half a gas station sandwich when the cat crept out from behind a stack of pallets. She had tossed a piece of turkey toward the cat. Clover had eaten it and then sat 3 feet away, staring. Wren tossed another piece. The cat came closer. By the time the sandwich was gone, the cat was sitting beside her. When Wren stood up and walked into the rain, Clover followed. They had been together every night since that evening. Clover rode in the messenger bag when they walked long distances, her head poking out through the flap. She slept curled against Wren's ribs when they found a dry spot under a bridge or a church awning. That cat never wandered far from Wren's side. Wren had been on her own since a week past her 19th birthday. Her mother's boyfriend had told her she needed to leave. He had stood in the kitchen doorway and said the words without raising his voice, like he was talking about taking out the trash. Her mother had been sitting at the table. She had not argued. She had not looked up. Wren packed her things in 20 minutes. She took the messenger bag, 2 changes of clothes, $40 in cash, a toothbrush, and a pocket knife her grandfather had given her when she was 12. She did not take anything else. She did not say goodbye. She walked to the Greyhound station and bought a one-way ticket heading south into the mountains. She had no plan beyond getting on that bus. She had no family waiting at the other end. She had Clover, a map, and the kind of stubbornness that keeps a person walking when every reasonable thought says, sit down and quit. The listing had appeared on a bulletin board at the Pocahontas County Courthouse. Someone had typed it on a manual typewriter and pinned it to the cork with a brass tack. The paper had yellowed around the edges. It read, "Carriage house for sale. Built 1887. Needs everything. $10 firm. Serious only. Ask for Maynard." Below the text was a phone number with a local exchange. Wren had called from a payphone outside the post office in town. The man who answered had a voice like gravel turning in a tin bucket. He spoke slowly and did not waste words. He told her the building sat on a quarter-acre lot at the end of Beard Heights Road, about 2 miles from the center of town. He said nobody had lived in it since 1961. He said the price was $10 because he wanted it gone before he died, and he did not care about the money. Wren told him she could be there by Friday. He said Friday would do just fine. She walked the 2 miles from the pull-off in to Marlinton proper that morning. The town sat in a river valley between green ridges that rose up like shoulders on both sides of the road. Dogwood trees were blooming white along the side streets. Main Street had a hardware store with a tin awning and a diner called the River House with red vinyl booths visible through the front window. Down the block stood a small library with a flag out front and a post office built from river stone. There was a barber shop with a spinning pole and a feed store with bags of corn stacked on the porch. People moved at a pace that suggested they had nowhere urgent to be and no intention of hurrying. A man in a green feed cap nodded at Wren as she passed the courthouse steps. She nodded back. Clover rode in the messenger bag with her head poking out through the flap. Her copper-gold eyes tracked every person and every bird. A boy on a red bicycle stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and pointed at the cat. Wren smiled at him and kept walking north toward Beard Heights Road. Maynard Hensley met her at the end of the gravel road where the pavement gave out. He was 72 years old, thin as a fence rail, with white hair combed straight back from his forehead and hands that looked like they had been carved from oak root. His knuckles were swollen at the joints. He wore a canvas work coat with a torn pocket and boots that had been resoled more than once. He did not smile when he saw Wren coming up the road. He looked at her bag, then at Clover, then at the gravel under his own boots. He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. "You the one who called," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact delivered flat. Wren said she was. Maynard turned and walked up the slope without another word. She followed him through the honeysuckle and up the hill. The carriage house stood at the top of a gentle rise behind a wall of wild honeysuckle and blackberry cane. It was a single-story structure about 28 feet wide and 36 feet deep, built from hand-cut clapboard over a dry-stacked stone foundation. The original arched double door hung crooked on iron strap hinges that had rusted the color of dried blood. The roof was cedar shake, sagging in the middle but still mostly intact along the ridgeline. Two windows on the east wall had wavy glass panes with bubbles frozen in the glass. One pane was cracked but holding together. Virginia creeper covered the south side from foundation to eave in a thick green curtain. The whole building leaned maybe 2 degrees to the left, like a tired man resting against a door frame. Inside, the floor was wide pine plank, warped and gray with age but solid enough to walk on without fear. The ceiling was open to the rafters where old wasp nests clung to the joints. Wren could see daylight through 3 spots in the roof where shingles had rotted away. There was no electricity, no plumbing, and no insulation in the walls. It smelled like old wood, dry earth, and the faint sweetness of cedar oil still trapped in the shake overhead. Clover jumped down from the bag and walked the full perimeter of the room with her nose to the floor. She sniffed every corner and every crack in the stone foundation. Then she sat down in a patch of sunlight coming through the east window and began to wash her face with one paw. "Built in 1887 by a man named Kessler," Maynard said from the doorway. He stood with his arms crossed over his canvas coat. "Used it for his buggy and his draft horse. Had a hayloft up in those rafters at one point. Family kept the place through 2 wars and the Depression." He paused and looked up at the ceiling. "Last person to live here was Kessler's granddaughter. She moved to Cincinnati in 1961 and never came back. Never wrote a letter. I bought the lot in 1986 for back taxes. Never did anything with it." Wren asked him why he was selling it for $10. Maynard looked at her for a long moment. His jaw worked like he was chewing something over. "Because I am 72 years old and I have 14 acres I cannot keep up with anymore. Because the county is going to condemn it if somebody does not fix that roof before winter. And because you showed up." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded deed that had been prepared in advance. "You want it or not?" Wren pulled a $10 bill from the front pocket of her jeans. It was one of the last bills she had. Maynard took it and signed the deed over to her right there on the tailgate of his blue pickup truck. He wrote the date in pencil below his signature. His handwriting was steady and square. He told her the county clerk's office was open until 4 in the afternoon and she should file the deed before the week was out. Then he climbed into his truck, turned the engine over, and drove down Beard Heights Road without looking back. Wren stood in the doorway of her carriage house, holding a property deed in one hand and a $10 receipt in the other. Clover sat at her boots on the worn pine threshold. The afternoon breeze came through the open door and moved the dust across the floor in slow curls. Wren's hands were shaking, but her jaw was set hard. She filed the deed 2 days later at the Pocahontas County Courthouse on Main Street. The clerk was a woman named Irene Combs, about 47 years old, with tortoiseshell reading glasses on a beaded chain and a no-nonsense way of moving paper from one stack to another. Irene looked at the deed, looked at Wren over the top of her glasses, and looked at the deed again. "You bought the Kessler carriage house," she said in a flat voice, "for $10. Wren nodded. Irene stamped the deed with a heavy iron stamp and entered it into the county record book with a ballpoint pen. "Honey, that place has not had a working roof since Reagan was president. You know what you were getting into." Wren said she did. Irene handed her the filed copy and a property tax card printed on yellow cardstock. Annual taxes on the quarter-acre lot were $38. Wren paid them in cash from the thin fold of bills in her back pocket. The renovation started the very next morning before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Wren had $22 left to her name. She walked to the hardware store on Main Street and priced materials with a pencil and the back of her map. Cedar shingles were $42 a bundle, and she needed at least 6 bundles for a proper roof repair. That was $252 she did not have. She stood in the lumber aisle staring at the numbers when a man named Josias Pruitt walked up from behind the counter and asked if she needed help finding anything. Josias was 31 years old, a carpenter and handyman who did odd jobs across the county. He had red-brown hair, cut short, a quiet voice that never rose above conversation level, and sawdust permanently embedded in the creases of his knuckles. Wren told him what she had bought and what she needed to fix. Josias leaned against the lumber rack and thought about it for a moment. "There is a barn coming down on the Alderson Road," he said. "Old dairy barn. Owner told me I could have whatever I wanted off it before he pushes it over with the dozer. That includes about 200 square feet of corrugated tin roofing and a full stack of tongue and groove pine siding. You help me pull it all down, you can have half." Wren said yes before he finished the sentence. They spent 3 full days pulling salvage materials from the Alderson Road barn. Wren worked from first light until the dark made it dangerous to be on a roof. She pried tin panels off the barn roof with a flat bar, working each nail loose one at a time. She stacked pine boards in the bed of Josias's truck, sorting them by length and condition. Clover sat on the truck tailgate through it all and watched them work with her plumed tail, curling and uncurling in the breeze. By the end of the 3rd day, they had enough tin to patch all 3 gaps in the carriage house roof and enough pine to replace the 4 worst sections of flooring inside. Josias brought his own tools and showed Wren how to cut corrugated tin with red-handled aviation snips. He taught her to overlap the panels by 2 inches and seal the seams with black roofing tar. She learned fast and without complaint. She did not mention the cut on her palm from a sharp tin edge. She did not stop for the blister on her right thumb. She just kept working through the heat and the bugs. The roof patch cost $85 in roofing tar, galvanized ring shank nails, and aluminum flashing. Josias would not take any money for his labor. He said he was between paying jobs anyway, and the work kept his hands busy. Wren bought him a hot coffee and a meatloaf sandwich at the River House Diner instead. The cook there was a woman named Pierce Adkins, 44 years old, with strong arms and a laugh that carried through the kitchen door. Pierce gave them extra cornbread wrapped in wax paper and did not charge for the sweet tea. Word had started to move through Marlinton by then. People at the post office and the feed store had started talking. They said a young woman had bought the old Kessler place for $10 and was fixing it up with nothing but a tortoiseshell cat and a flat bar. People were curious about her. Some were skeptical. A few were quietly impressed. If this story is giving you something, take a second to subscribe and leave a comment down below. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories coming to your feed every single week. Wren sealed the 3 roof gaps over the course of 2 long days on the ladder. The carriage house no longer leaked when the rain came. She swept the pine floor from wall to wall with a broom she bought for $4 at the hardware store, and found the wood was in better shape than she had expected. Most of the planks were solid heart pine, dense and tight-grained, the kind of old-growth lumber that does not exist anymore. But one section near the northwest corner of the room felt different underfoot. The boards there were slightly raised, maybe a 1/4 inch higher than the surrounding floor. They did not creak the same way when she stepped on them. Wren knelt down and pressed her palm flat against the wood. There was a gap underneath. She could feel cool air rising through the narrow seam between 2 planks. It was a draft coming from below the floor. Clover walked over from her spot by the window and sniffed at the seam with her black nose. The cat pawed at the gap between the boards, then sat back on her haunches and looked up at Wren with those copper-gold eyes. Wren walked to her tool pile in the corner and picked up the flat bar. She came back to the northwest corner and worked the beveled edge of the bar under the lip of the first plank. The nails holding the board down were square-cut, hand-forged, old and brittle with rust. They came loose without much fight. She lifted the board carefully and set it aside against the wall. Underneath was a shallow cavity between the floor joists, a space about 8 inches deep running the full width between the beams. And in that cavity, resting on the bare stone foundation below, wrapped in oilcloth that had turned dark brown and stiff with age, was a bundle. Wren reached down and lifted it out with both hands. It was heavy for its size, maybe 12 pounds. She set it on the pine floor beside her and unfolded the oilcloth slowly, peeling back 1 layer at a time. Clover sat right beside her with her ears forward, watching every move. Inside the oilcloth was a wooden case, hand-dovetailed from American black walnut, about 18 inches long and 10 inches wide and 4 inches deep. The dovetail joints were tight and precise. The lid was held shut with a small brass hook latch that had turned green with age. Wren unhooked the latch and opened the lid. The case was lined with faded green velvet that had once been a deep emerald color. Lying in fitted slots carved into the velvet lining were 26 pieces of coined silver flatware. There were 8 dinner forks, 8 dinner knives with bone handles, 8 tablespoons, and 2 large serving pieces. Each piece was hand-forged with a fiddleback pattern handle, a style common in the Shenandoah Valley during the mid to late 1800s. On the back of every handle, engraved in small neat capital letters, were the initials AK, and below that the stamped hallmark of a silversmith. The silver was dark gray with tarnish, but solid and heavy in the hand. The large serving spoon alone was nearly 10 inches from tip to end. The craftsmanship was precise and deliberate throughout. Wren sat on the floor, holding one of the dinner forks and staring at it in the dim light from the window. Her hands were shaking again. She carried the walnut case to the Pocahontas County Library the very next morning. The librarian, a patient woman with gray braids, helped her search through county records, census ledgers, and old property documents stored in the basement archive. The initials AK matched Augustus Kessler, the man who had built the Carriage house in 1887. According to the 1880 census, Augustus had been a prosperous farmer and a county commissioner. His wife Louisa had been known throughout the valley for setting a fine table at church suppers and holiday gatherings. The silversmith mark stamped on the back of each piece matched a known maker from Staunton, Virginia, a craftsman who had been active in the trade during the 1870s and 1880s. The pieces appeared to be a complete commissioned set, made to order for the Kessler family. Wren photographed every single piece from multiple angles and sent the images to an appraiser in Roanoke who specialized in estate silver. The appraiser was a man named Fletcher Boone, 61 years old with wire-rimmed glasses and 3 decades of experience in Appalachian antiques and estate silver. Fletcher made the drive to Marlinton 5 days after receiving the photographs. He arrived in a gray sedan and carried a leather case of tools into the carriage house. He set up a folding table near the east window for the best natural light. He examined each of the 26 pieces individually with a jeweler's loupe and a calibrated digital scale. He tested the silver content with an acid test kit. He measured the gauge of the metal with a micrometer. He studied the engraving on every handle under a magnifying lamp, comparing the hallmark to photographs in a reference book he had brought with him. Clover sat on the windowsill the entire time and watched him work without moving. Fletcher did not seem to mind having a cat observe his process. He worked for over 2 hours in near silence, making notes in a leather-bound pad. Then he set down the last serving piece on the velvet lining and looked across the table at Wren. This is a complete 26-piece coin-silver flatware set by James K. Dunnington of Staunton. Dunnington was one of the finest rural silversmiths working in the Shenandoah Valley during the late 19th century. His surviving pieces are rare and highly sought by collectors. Fletcher turned the serving spoon over in his hands. A full-matched set like this, with the original walnut case and documented family provenance, is extremely rare. I have seen partial sets at auction, never a complete one like this. He set the spoon down gently. I would place a conservative auction estimate on this set at $42,000. With the right collectors competing at the right sale, it could reach $50,000. Wren did not speak for a long time after he said that number. She sat on the pine floor with her back against the wall. She looked at the silver laid out on the faded green velvet in the lamplight. She looked at Clover sitting on the windowsill with her plume tail wrapped around her paws. She looked at the very floor she had pried open with a flat bar and a pair of shaking hands just days before. "Are you certain about that number?" she said quietly. Fletcher nodded without hesitation. "I have handled Dunnington silver only 3 times in 30 years of practice. This is the finest and most complete set I have ever examined. The provenance through the Kessler family and this building adds to the historical value. Whoever hid this set under the floor was protecting it from something. They did a very good job of it." Wren told Maynard about the discovery the following week. She borrowed Josias's truck and drove out to Maynard's property on a Wednesday afternoon. Maynard was sitting on his front porch in a straight-back chair, shelling pinto beans from dried pods into a white enamel bucket. He listened to Wren's full account without interruption, his hands never stopping their work on the bean pods. When she finished talking, he looked at her across the porch rail and said, "That silver belongs to you. I sold you the building and everything in it. That is how a deed works in this state." Wren told him she wanted to offer him a share of the value. She said it felt right. Maynard shook his head slowly. "I have 14 acres, a government pension, and more pinto beans than I can eat in a lifetime. You keep every cent of it. Fix that building up the way it deserves. Augustus Kessler would have wanted somebody living in his carriage house who would take real care of the place." He dropped another handful of beans into the bucket. That was the end of the conversation. Wren did not rush to sell the silver. She continued working on the carriage house through the spring and into the warm days of early summer. Josias came by on weekends and helped her frame a partition wall from salvaged 2x4 lumber to create a separate sleeping area in the back third of the building. She bought a salvaged wood stove from a man in Durban for $75. The stove was a cast-iron box model with 2 burner plates on top. It was dented on one side but fully functional. She ran 6 feet of double-wall chimney pipe up through a galvanized thimble she cut into the tin roof patch. Total cost for the stove and the chimney installation came to $160, including the fire cement and the thimble collar. She built a simple kitchen counter along the west wall from the salvaged tongue and groove pine boards, sanding them smooth with 80 grit paper. She installed a hand-pump water spigot using a cast-iron pitcher pump she found at a farm auction outside Hillsboro for $35. Josias helped her dig a shallow well point down 12 feet and connect the pump with a sand point and drive coupling. The plumbing supplies cost $120 in PVC pipe, brass fittings, and a check valve. She mounted a single solar panel on the south-facing slope of the roof. The panel was a used 100-watt polycrystalline unit she bought from an online listing for $65, including shipping. She wired it through a charge controller to a deep-cycle marine battery she found at an auto parts store for $45. A small 300-watt inverter completed the system for another $30. The whole electrical setup gave her enough power to run a single LED light, charge her phone, and operate a small clip fan on hot nights. Total electrical cost was $140. She patched the cracked window pane with marine epoxy and fiberglass mesh for $8. She rehung the arched double door on new hand-forged strap hinges from a blacksmith in Cass for $24. She insulated the interior walls with 1-inch rigid foam board she bought at a contractor discount from the hardware store on Main Street for $95. She caulked every gap in the stone foundation with hydraulic cement that cost $15 per bucket. Total renovation cost from April through the end of August came to $847. Every single dollar was accounted for in a spiral notebook where Wren recorded each expense in careful pencil columns. An elderly woman named Corva Hedrick came walking up Beard Heights Road to the Carriage house on a warm afternoon in June. Corva was 79 years old, born and raised in Pocahontas County, and she served as the unofficial historian of Marlinton and the surrounding hollows. She had white hair pinned under a wide straw hat, and she carried a walking stick made from a sourwood branch with the bark still on it. She stood in the doorway of the Carriage house and looked at everything Wren had done without saying a word for a full minute. She looked at the patched tin roof, the swept pine floor, the cast-iron wood stove with its black chimney pipe, the solar panel wired to the battery on the shelf. She looked at Clover sleeping on a folded wool blanket near the east window. "I knew Augustus Kessler's granddaughter," Corva said at last. "Her name was Elspeth. She was a proud and private woman. She told me one time, sitting right here on this hill, that the family had hidden something valuable inside the Carriage house during the war. She would not say which war, and she would not say what it was. She just said it was safer where it was than anywhere else." Corva looked at Wren standing in the doorway. "Seems like it was waiting for the right person to come along and find it." Wren asked Corva if she would like to come inside and sit down. Corva accepted. She lowered herself into the one chair Wren owned, a ladder back she had found at a yard sale for $3 with one rung repaired with wire. Clover jumped into Corva's lap without being invited, circled twice, and settled down, purring. Corva stroked the cat's patchwork fur, running her fingers through the long black and amber and chocolate hair. "You have done good, honest work here," Corva said. "This building was dying by inches. Now it has a heartbeat again." Wren boiled water on the wood stove and made 2 cups of coffee in mismatched mugs. They sat together in the Carriage house while the afternoon light came through the old wavy glass windows and made golden patterns on the pine floor that shifted as the sun moved west. By August, Wren had made her decision about the silver. She would sell 6 individual pieces at auction and keep the remaining 20 as a set in the original walnut case. Fletcher Boone arranged the sale through an established auction house in Roanoke that specialized in Southern antiques. The 6 pieces, which included 2 forks, 2 spoons, and the 2 serving pieces, sold for a combined total of $11,200 after the auction house commission. Wren deposited the check in a new savings account at the Pocahontas County Bank on Main Street. She used a portion of the money to hire a licensed roofing contractor to install a proper standing seam metal roof over the entire Carriage house. That job cost $3,800 in materials and labor. She used another portion to have the solar electrical system professionally inspected and brought up to county code by a licensed electrician. That work cost $900. She kept the remaining balance in savings as a safety net. For the first time in her entire life, she had money in a bank account, a solid roof overhead, and an address she could call her own. Maynard Hensley came by the Carriage house one more time, on a cool evening in September. He pulled his blue truck up Beard Heights Road and climbed out carrying a bushel basket of apples from his orchard, red and gold and heavy with juice. He stood in the doorway and looked at the new metal roof gleaming in the late light. He looked at the straightened arched door hanging plumb on its new hinges. He watched the wood stove smoke rising from the chimney pipe in a thin gray line against the darkening sky. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when the thing he is looking at matches what he hoped it would become. "Kessler built this place to last," he said quietly. "He just needed somebody stubborn enough to prove it." Wren invited him inside for coffee. He stayed for a full hour, sitting in the ladder-back chair while Wren sat on an overturned crate. Clover lay on the pine floor between them and purred loud enough to hear from the front step outside. The Carriage house on Beard Heights Road in Marlinton is still standing today. The arched double door hangs straight and true on its iron hinges. The metal roof does not leak. There is a warm light glowing in the east window most evenings after dark. If you drive past on a cool autumn night, you might see wood stove smoke rising from the chimney into the mountain air. You might see a young woman reading by lamplight. And if you look at the front stone step, you will notice a tortoise-shell cat with copper gold eyes sitting in the glow, her plume tail curled neatly around her paws, watching the road. And that is where we will leave this story today. If it moved you, if it reminded you that a fresh start can come from the most unexpected places, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell us what you would have done if you found that silver under the floor. Until next time, this is Paw and Trail Stories. Take care of each other out there.